America, and welcome to the Glenn Beck program. Tonight, is there a Shariah threat to America? No, there's not. I guarantee you what you're going to learn tonight is going to open your eyes a little bit. For instance, are we, the American taxpayers, actually funding terror? Probably. Are we unwittingly contributing to the destruction of our own Constitution? Yeah. You know, what's amazing to me is that we have, we're a good and decent people, and we try to be inclusive and try not to be hateful, but we're going to be remembered not as tolerant, we're going to be remembered as morons. We are taking our own country down. I showed you this before. This is a theory that soon as Tunisia happened on the 31st of January, I said, look out, Tunisia is going to be possibly the Archduke Ferdinand moment. Anybody remember me saying that? Did you think I was... I mean, it sounded nuts at the time, didn't it? It sounded like, it's Tunisia, Glenn, relax. And now look how it is spread across. And I said it would cascade and sweep the Middle East and begin to destabilize Europe and the rest of the world. The Wall Street Journal reported this week that, that yes, indeed, radicals, Islamists, communists, and socialists are working together in the Middle East. Yes, I know that sounds crazy, but it's starting to happen. And we know that it's happening in the West, and we know that it's happening here in America. There have been arrests of people who are funding terrorists or working with terrorists, and they're from the American left. But tonight I want to show you something else. Tonight I want to show you a little bit of Shariah and some of the laws that are being passed here in America and what we're doing to ourselves. Shariah, every faithful Muslim, is obligated to wage jihad. Now there's a couple of two kinds of jihad. There's the, hey, look at me, I'm not a threat, jihad. And then there is the other jihad. The people will say that it's the jihad of the soul. There's the stealth or civilization jihad. The stealth or civilization jihad would be like the Muslim Brotherhood, although I contend that they're this one as well. We've shown you this guy before, Yusef Al-Qaradawi. This guy is the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. Al-Qaradawi is rated the 9th most powerful Muslim on earth. And you might remember some of the lovely things he had to say about the Jewish people.
سلط عليهم طوال التاريخ من يؤدبهم نتيجة إفسادهم فأطلق رصاصة على أعداء الله اليهود.
But remember, Muslim Brotherhood, they're changed. They're not like that anymore, even though he's still their spiritual leader. There's something else that he has said that we haven't told you about yet on this program. He said it in 2006. He was talking to the BBC about charity in the Islamic culture. That's called zakat. Now, here are his exact words on the subject. Quote, I don't like this word donations. I like to call it jihad with money, because God has ordered us to fight our enemies with our lives and our money. Jihad with money. That's where we'd like to start tonight. Jihad doesn't always come in the form of a suicide vest or a plane being flown into buildings. There are also jihadists who are working to destroy America from within, through the economy and through other avenues like infiltrating the justice system or the media, Congress, American culture. It is game on. Financial jihad is being waged at this very moment against the United States and across the globe to the tune of $1 trillion. If you've ever heard the term Sharia-compliant banking or Sharia-compliant products, well, let's get into that a little bit. Sharia-compliant banking or finance is the practice of ensuring that all monetary matters are in full compliance with all aspects of Islamic law. Transactions must not involve products like pork or alcohol. They have to avoid interest and other things. But Sharia banking also involves charity or zakat. Remember what we just heard from Zarqawi. He likes to call zakat jihad with money. Why? Well, Sharia requires Muslims to tithe a percentage of money to charity. So Sharia-compliant banks and mutual funds are ultimately tithing to charity. Okay, this sounds fine so far, right? But which charities are the monies going to? Charities like Hamas or Hezbollah? Well, that's up to the Sharia banking advisors, who is an advisor for the banks. Well, there was a bank called Bank Al-Taqwa. You're not going to believe who the advisor was. This guy. That was shut down by the Treasury Department for funding terror groups. Who would have seen that coming? Well, are there any other obvious points that maybe we're turning our head to? Islamic banking has entered the United States and other Western nations thanks to banks like Citigroup, HSBC, Barclays, Deutsche Bank, and others. It's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself until you get down to the Sharia-compliant officers. Now, there's one other thing. Are we, as a nation, the owners of the largest purveyor of Sharia-compliant insurance products in the world? Yes, we are. In fact, we bought the company as taxpayers, AIG. The U.S. government took it over in 2008. I want to introduce you to a couple of people. First is Chris Holton. He's the vice president for at the Center for Security Policy. His organization published a book called Sharia, The Threat to America. Holton is also the editor of ShariaFinanceWatch.org. And Daniel Pipes, he is the founder of the Middle East Forum, a visiting fellow at the Hoover Institute, and author of Militant Islam Reaches America. Great to have you both. Let me start first, Chris, with you, because Daniel, you watch over Sharia, and your expertise really is finance, correct, Chris?
Sure. Yes,
okay. So, first of all, do I have it all right?
Yes, sir. The only thing that I could see that you might have left out is the fact that Iran actually dominates Sharia-compliant finance in the world.
But this isn't necessarily nefarious, right? I mean, you could be a Sharia-compliant and not necessarily nefarious, right? Both of you agree with that?
That's true.
Okay, so why is Sharia compliance something we should worry about?
Well, first of all, the whole purpose of Sharia-compliant finance is to promote Sharia. And promoting Sharia is something that we should not have here in America, because Sharia is the enemy threat doctrine. It is the goal of groups like Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, and Hamas. It is antithetical to everything that's in our Constitution. And in fact, in my opinion, it is the biggest threat to our constitutional rights over the next 25 years in this country.
Would you agree with that, Daniel?
Well, there are different kinds of threats. I mean, China is one kind of threat and Sharia is another kind of threat, but it is certainly a very important threat.
I mean, a behead you kind of threat. I mean, I think, do we all not agree that if America fails because we're lazy or we just can't get our act together, and somebody else beats us in fair competition, anybody have a problem with that? Yeah, no, I mean, that's our fault. We're sloppy and lazy. But the threat of someone coming in, and you know, we have our own problems with our own radicals here in America that are trying to do this, and overthrow something, that's a whole different topic. Chris, help me out on the Sharia-compliant officers. How are these guys picked?
Well, there's not many Sharia scholars in the world. There's probably only about 200 or so who sit on Sharia advisory boards of Sharia-compliant financial institutions. You've got two of the superstars of Sharia advisory up there. There's Taqi Usmani, who is a former Supreme Court justice from Pakistan, and of course there's Yusef Al-Qaradawi, who is the foremost Sharia scholar in the Sunni Sharia world.
How much money do these guys control, just these two?
Well, billions of dollars, and they themselves sit on multiple boards, probably get paid $50,000 for each board that they sit on. They've enriched themselves.
Qaradawi, he is a guy who is at a Muslim university or something here in America, or he sits on a board here in America, right? Still? Do you know what I'm talking about, Daniel? Do you, Chris?
Yes.
What is it?
Islamic American University. He was a founder, and he is the chairman of the Board of Trustees, but he has to do it in absentia because he's forbidden from traveling to America because of his ties to terrorist groups.
How is that happening, Daniel? I mean, what are we doing here? I mean, how do we have a guy who is, I mean, do you think he's a threat to America?
Yusef Al-Qaradawi is a threat. Yes.
Yeah. So how do we not know this stuff?
Well, he is forbidden from coming in the country, and it actually wasn't so much ties to terrorism as it was the substance of a book he wrote that the U.S. government found offensive, and he was not allowed in, and has not been here for decades, if ever.
Right. But are you saying he's not, his influence isn't felt here?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the government is bifurcated. There's some in the government who understand who he is and want to keep him out, and there are others who think that he is the solution to Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, that this kind of moderate Islamism, this nonviolent Islamism, is the solution.
May I just ask a question? Who thinks that, you know, hey, a few people like the Nazis, even though they inflated the numbers, you know, killing the Jews is nonviolent? I mean, is there anybody here who thinks that just the clips you've heard is nonviolent? How is anyone thinking he's nonviolent?
They were Nazis who were nonviolent themselves. They were part of, obviously, very, very violent machinery. But the clerks and the banks, exactly, and that's the point here. We're agreeing that these so-called moderate Islamists are, in fact, part of the same machinery to apply the same Sharia that leads to the same domination of the world.
Okay,
but they themselves are not violent. And so they get
wait. I've never said, as a spiritual leader or as a human being or, you know, any time that I can think of, hey, by the way, I'm just praying, and seriously mean it, I'm just praying that God is going to give me the strength to shoot Jews from my wheelchair. Who is defining him as moderate?
U.S. government, by and large, sees the Muslim Brotherhood as moderate. In other words, it's not Taliban. It's not out there planning and plotting.
Chris, help me. What's worse?
He's absolutely right. The left in this country also seems to have a romantic view of the Muslim Brotherhood as well.
No, I know that, but I've never heard this before. I mean, I know that they're all in denial of the Muslim Brotherhood, but I just thought they shred, you know, they shed the, what was it Van Jones says, shed the radical pose for the radical ends. But he's more radical than what he's saying? Is there somebody more radical than what he's saying there? I mean, that's pretty radical.
Well, as you point out before, there are really two different ways to apply the Sharia. One is through violence. Taliban, Khomeini would be examples. And the other way is working through the institutions politically and nonviolently. And by and large, in the West, if you are in that latter group and you're not engaged in criminal activity or violent activity, you get a pass. Governments and other public institutions, including many television stations, many universities, will say, you're fine, you're okay. It's just talk. It's okay.
Chris,
so in some ways, that's more dangerous because it gets a pass. Yeah. Nobody gives bin Laden a pass.
Nobody gives the Tea Party a pass, and they haven't said anything. Tell me, Chris, what you're most concerned about here with, because we looked. There's several groups, and I don't want to single one out, but there's one that we found that is a hedge fund, and it's a Sharia hedge fund, and could find some nefarious characters in and around, et cetera, but you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But I didn't see anything that necessarily was smoking gun bad. When it comes to finance, are we missing something that we should be seeing?
There's very few smoking guns, just as you said. Look, Taqi Usmani's one, Qaradawi's one, but there's other Sharia scholars that have been much more careful of what they've said and what they've written over the years. It's very difficult to figure them out. You can look back at some of the backgrounds of some of these people, and you look at where they're educated, and you realize that they're educated in incubators for jihad.
Hang on just a second. Tiffany, do you feel comfortable with me saying the name of this hedge fund? Okay, could you remind me the name of this hedge fund?
Sharia.
Okay, Sharia Capital. Sharia Capital is one of my researchers actually came over to my house on a Saturday and said, Glenn, I just found this, and this doesn't seem right. And they started looking into it, and there's a lot of things in and around. Can you tell me anything? Because there's no smoking guns, but you agree that there's things in there that just are a little
Look, the whole problem here is that if you go back to Great Britain and see what's happened in Great Britain, the purpose of Sharia finance is to promote Sharia, and one of the ways that they've basically lulled the British to sleep into accepting Sharia into their society is through Sharia finance. The Archbishop of Canterbury made a statement a couple of years ago in which he said that British common law is going to have to incorporate aspects of Sharia, and it really isn't that big a deal, seeing as we've already incorporated Sharia-compliant finance. This is a Trojan horse that's operating. Now, in terms of that specific hedge fund, look, there is a Sharia advisor on that hedge fund who was educated in a madrasa in Pakistan that is a madrasa that has all kinds of ties to jihadis. Now, that doesn't mean that he's a jihadi, but he went to the same school as a bunch of them. So it's very worrisome.
All right. Is there, can these, like for instance, a hedge fund like that, the hedge funds are unregulated. They have, I mean, wild power with wild amounts of money. There was a Pentagon report that came out recently that said that there are sovereign funds or huge pools of wealth that they have seen. For instance, they almost collapsed on the last one. There's an unexplained amount of wealth being sucked out of the system quickly when we had our financial collapse. And somebody did a report for the Pentagon and said, that was unusual, there's something wrong there, and they think that was a test run. Somebody was trying to collapse our system, and they haven't found them, and they're still trying to do it. Is this something that a hedge fund the size of the one that you know could do? Is there something that we as Americans should be looking for? Are there any telltale signs, or is this just something that is just saying, well, they might be giving money to terrorists here, like that's not bad enough, but they might be funneling money off to terrorists?
This is what I would say on that. I don't think there's any evidence that that particular hedge fund is involved in
I'm talking
any of this.
generally. I'm not talking about that particular.
Certainly the financial jihadists around the world who promote Sharia-compliant finance, many of them have the motivation to do this. We know Qaradawi hates America. We know Usmani hates America. They've said it. They've written it. They control a lot of money in the Sharia-compliant finance world. Then you have Iran. The largest Sharia-compliant financial institutions in the world are not these names that we see up here. They're state-controlled Iranian banks, by far. Iran has over twice as many Sharia-compliant assets under management as Saudi Arabia. So these are people and institutions that certainly are motivated to damage America in the right circumstances.
Okay. Now, when we come back, I want to spend a little bit of time with Daniel here on some of the things that are happening here in the United States. I just read, Daniel, I think it was like last week or 2 weeks ago, there was yet another judge that said, you know what, Sharia law applies here. That is suicide, America. Wake up to it next. This week I have been talking to you about the threat over in the Middle East, and I tell you, I believe, well, let me ask you, how many people have been watching the show this week and feel that you feel comfortable at least that maybe America is heading down a path where we're on the wrong side in the Middle East? Yeah, that's pretty significant. How many people think that, not necessarily by us, but that Israel is being set up? I mean, look at that. We are coddling our enemies at the very best now. We're helping them in all over the world. And one of the ways that it happens under the radar is with Sharia law. It is a threat to America. Daniel Pipes is with us. He is the director and founder of the Middle East Forum. He's a visiting fellow at the Hoover Institute and author of Militant Islam Reaches America. And with us also is Chris Holton. He's a vice president at the Center for Security Policy. Daniel, it's amazing to me, and we'll get into the 12th Imam here in a minute, but It's amazing to me how, I think 5 years ago, before this economic meltdown started, I was very tuned in to what was happening in Iran and the Middle East. And then we kind of took our eye off the ball because America started having so many problems under George W. Bush, and then just kept cascading. And haven't been paying attention enough. And I sit here now and think, oh my gosh, what have people been doing while America went back to sleep? And one of the things is Sharia law is like starting to ugly creep in America, right?
People are so focused on terrorism that they don't pay attention to the insidious educational, media, legal, and political growth of radical Islam in the West as a whole, and the United States in particular. Yes.
Do you, organizations, I mean, they're streaming now the Muslim Brotherhood. Our administration says nothing wrong with the Muslim Brotherhood. You agree with that?
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with? Nothing wrong with
I agree with it? No, no. I agree with the administration saying yeah.
Oh, yeah, no. I know that. All of a sudden I'm like, Daniel, what's happening? They've gotten to you, man!
No, I don't agree with that.
Yeah, okay. What about organizations here in America that have been mainstreamed already, even by the last administration? CARE.
Great example. CARE was founded in 1994 as a stepchild of Hamas and has undertaken to promote the ideas of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the parent of Hamas in turn, in the United States. And it does it very aggressively, but it does it non-violently.
Right. But, you know, I'm always a little worried about any organization that fights so hard to silence people it disagrees with.
And it has ties to terrorism. It just itself is not engaged in terrorism. But there are plenty of employees and board members and the like who've got ties to terrorism and apologizes for terrorism. It's a dirty organization, and it's an aggressive organization, and it has been by and large accepted not so much by the government, which has queasy feelings about it, but by the press and the academy, which are celebrating it. I mean, CARE's ability to get a story is remarkable. It holds a press conference, and you've got a story.
You say that the biggest concern of the creep of Sharia is actually polygamy.
I think it's the deepest matter. There are lots of different fronts, but to me the deepest of all is the institution of marriage, which, yeah, I'm not saying it's always maintained, but monogamy is the rule of the land. And look at the Mormons and what trouble they had with polygamy. Right,
and they still have, in Utah, they still have people. Well, full disclosure, I am one, but I got one wife because that's plenty. But there are still people that have been excommunicated and everything else, and there's communities.
Hit hard by the law. Mm-hmm. Now, in the United States, there's no polygamy acceptable yet. But I think it's coming because you can look at other jurisdictions, like the United Kingdom or Ontario, where it is
polygamy
legal,
is legal in England?
So long as it's contracted in a country where it is legal. So you have a man and 2 wives and 5 children coming from Morocco or from India, where it's legal. They arrive in Britain or in Ontario, and they say, we're here. And the government says, fine. And the government in Britain goes further and has different allocations for social welfare for the first wife, the second wife, the third wife. And if the man dies intestate, then there are special provisions for the different wives. It's all very legal.
Just pick up Chris's face here, just will you? Chris is just like, we're so dead. We're just so dead.
Now that's profound, I think. That's important. And I think it's coming our way. One can see it already. Look, here in New York City a few years ago, there was a major fire. Some 11 people were killed, including children. Well, it turned out the 2 families involved were both polygamous African immigrant families. And it was covered like there was nothing out of the ordinary. The mayor went to visit them, and it was all very normal. Of course, some people are monogamous, some are polygamous. There was no particular discussion.
Yeah, well, where you would say, you know, you bring in these people who claim to be Mormons, and they're polygamist, and the house burns down.
Right.
Oh my gosh, that's a story for a month. We're almost suicidal.
The press is full of puff pieces about men who say, well, I was raised in a polygamous household. It was wonderful. I had all these aunties around, and I want to have it too, and my children love it, and the wives love each other.
Is there, hang on just a second, Is there a guy in here who says, man, if I could just have 2 wives, it'd be sweet? Anybody here have any takers? I don't. Not that we don't cherish and love the one wife. I just can't imagine, you know, talking to one and then having from the other one. It's nuts. All right, back in just a second. I want to show you a disturbing tape that has come out of the Middle East this week, and then we talk to the audience. Just a second.